All right, welcome and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Plantrician education series tonight. It is a special honor to have my dear friend, Dr. Michael Greger, on board and in the virtual house with us tonight. Dr. Michael Greger and I have been friends for, I was thinking about this, Michael. It's got to be 14, maybe 14 years, right?
Ah,
The very beginning. That's before I had gray and the beard, and
oh, that was yeah, with the Whole Foods
you were
stuff
with the
and
immersions. That's right.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
been a great joy and an honor to be on this journey with you, Michael. And for those of you that don't know Michael, Dr. Michael Greger is the co-founder, actually the founder of nutritionfacts.org, 2011. Is that right, Michael?
Yep, yep.
New York Times bestselling author multiple times with his first book, How Not to Die, and the 10th anniversary book is being worked on currently, and that will be coming out 2026, right? Or 20,
No, this December,
December
2025.
2025. So watch for that book. As you know, Michael Greger has crisscrossed the globe advocating for the health benefits of a whole food plant-based diet. And special thanks to Michael because he reads every journal article on plants and nutrition and health every single year so that we don't have to. And Michael, we just appreciate all of your work, the incredible efforts that you have put forward in creating a movement around the science of lifestyle and nutrition. And I want to thank you for your great friendship and support all these years. Just a dear friend. Thanks, Michael.
It is a blessing.
It is a blessing. And for those of you that are joining us for this Plantrician Ed series, we're going to have about a 20 to 30-minute conversation, but we really want to hear from your questions. So down at the bottom in the, you'll see a button that says more. If you push the button, there's a Q&A bubble, and that's where you can put questions in for Dr. Greger, and I'll help facilitate those questions as we go through the evening. Towards the end of this session, about an hour and 15 minutes from now, we'll open up the chat, and we have a poll question for all of you. So be watching for that poll question so we can get some feedback from you. We're always trying to improve the way that we deliver information and answer your questions and meet your needs. That's the purpose of Plantrician Project. That's why we started more than a decade ago, was to equip, empower, and educate you, healthcare providers, individuals, with the indisputable information and the science of plant-based nutrition to prevent, suspend, reverse disease, and to make your life more joyful and more wonderful. That's really the end goal. Creates a much more compassionate and joyful world. And so, Michael, I really appreciate you joining us this evening to dive in on this important question of sustainable weight management, GLP-1 drugs, and natural alternatives. And I thought it would be good for everyone if we kind of start at the outset talking about the problem, just for a few minutes, to highlight this obesity epidemic, which is really something new that's never happened before in history, and to try and identify some of the underlying causes so that people understand the forces that are really at work against them. And one of the quotes that I always like to use at my immersions, just to help settle people a little bit around this idea of weight management, comes from Maya Angelou, an amazing poet. And she says, "I did then what I knew how to do, but now that I know better, I do better." And I really, as we talk about weight, I believe it's so important that we take away this layer of guilt, shame, feeling powerless, feeling like you don't have enough willpower, because I want to tell you it's not you. It's not you, it's the system, it's the culture that we've created over the last 100 years that has created an environment and engineered a food system that naturally leads to weight gain. And so we've all been indoctrinated and exploited by a food system that creates this massive problem. And so with that, Michael, maybe you can just take us through just a short history of how we got to this place today where 79% of people in America are overweight or obese, and at least a third of our kids are suffering from obesity. And this is not just here in America, this is a global problem because we've exported our lifestyle around the world. So can you take us through a brief history, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really want to emphasize what you said about shame. I couldn't agree more. Rather than some sort of disorder, weight gain may largely be a normal response by normal people to an abnormal situation, right? With, as you said, more than 70% of Americans overweight, it's literally normal, right? The rise in the number of excess calories provided by the US food supply since the 1970s, more than sufficient to explain the entire obesity epidemic. In other words, it's the food. The rise in caloric surplus was really less a change in food quantity than a change in food quality, with this explosion of cheap, high calorie, low quality convenience foods. Think of the kind of Twinkie is like, with enough, time and effort, any ambitious cook could, create some cream filled cakes in their own kitchen. But today they're available at every turn for less than $1, right? If every time we wanted to eat a Twinkie, we had to bake it ourselves, we would probably eat fewer of them. There's a really compelling parallel with cigarette production. Before automated rolling machines were invented, cigarettes actually were rolled by hand. But after automation, cigarette prices plunged and production leaped into the billions. So cigarettes actually went from a relatively kind of uncommon to basically everywhere. In the 20th century, the average per capita cigarette consumption went from about 50 cigarettes a year to more than 4,000 a
Wow.
year by the time the 1964 Surgeon General's report came out. So the average American, walking around, went from smoking about one cigarette a week to a half a pack a day. Now, tobacco was just as addictive before and after, mass marketing. But what changed was this greater opportunity for cheap, easy access, just like we now have an aggressively marketed ubiquity of tasty, cheap, convenient calories, right? And now, the plague of tobacco-related deaths wasn't just due to the mass manufacture and marketing of cheap cigarettes. Tobacco companies actively sought to make their products even more craveable by spraying the sheets of tobacco with nicotine. The food industry, likewise, employs so-called taste engineers to accomplish a similar goal: maximize the irresistibility of their products. Salt, sugar, fat used as kind of like the 3 points of the compass to create these super stimulating so-called hyper palatability, to tempt people into these impulsive buys, compulsive consumption. Foods are designed intentionally to hook into our natural evolutionary triggers, breach whatever biological barriers, help keep consumption within reasonable limits. With advances in processing and packaging, combined with government policies and handouts that foster these cheap commodities to this kind of food industrial complex, led to this glut of ready to eat, ready to heat, ready to drink products. Impatient investors, led to marketing ever more pervasive, persuasive, marketing attempts bombarded on all sides by ads for fast food and junk food, and leading to this just unfettered access to copious, convenient, low cost, high calorie foods, willingly engineered, chemical additives to make them, hyper stimulatingly sweet or savory, yet only weakly satiating. And as such, we are drowning in a quicksand of excess calories. More and more mental energy required to swim upstream against this constant bombardment, 24/7 panopticon of, tempting treats at arm's length wherever we go. Can you think of a single industry, major industry, that does not benefit from people eating more junk? Like, that's everything: agriculture, food products, grocery, restaurant, diet industry, drug industry, they all profit from eating more junk. And they employ armies of lobbyists to make sure nothing happens on a government level to do anything about it. And so if, part of the problem is this cheap, tasty convenience, right? Is the solution, hard to find foods that are unappealing and expensive? No, maybe there's a way to get the best of both worlds. Easy, healthy, delicious, satisfying meals that help you lose weight. That's what whole food plant-based eating can offer.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too when you look at graphs that, 1970s, 1980s, there's really an inflection point, right? Where we see marketing budgets and the rise of obesity, overweight, chronic disease. Is there anything else that happened in that time period that really shifted this?
It's interesting. I'm publishing another book this year on ultra-processed foods. And one thing that I did not realize when I started doing research is that the ultra-processed food kind of epidemic started when the tobacco industry started buying up food companies. So Philip Morris bought Kraft, R.J. Reynolds bought Nabisco, and formed the largest food companies in the world. And so all the tobacco, food scientists came over and they created Kool-Aid and Capri Sun, like all these children's drinks that go on to this day. And they just started making this new hyper palatable junk food. And it all took off when tobacco industries were doing the same thing they did with tobacco with food, and have left us with this legacy where now most of the calories we eat here in the US and around much of the world now is this ultra-processed junk. It really couldn't even be called food, really. But these kind of industrially processed, food-like substances that artificially flavored or colored or, to, make sure we can't just eat one. And boy, can we not. And it's very profitable to sell, brown sugar water, especially with taxpayer subsidized sugar. But, whereas, produce is like the worst thing to sell, right? If you want to make money, right, it goes bad. It rots on the shelf. It's perishable, right? You want a snack cake that sits on the shelf for a few weeks, packed with preservatives. And so, often in grocery stores, the produce section is kind of like the loss leader. Like they may not even make money from produce, but it just brings people into the store in hopes that you'll buy chips and soda on the way out. And that's where they're going to make their money from. And so the whole system is really set up to reward, selling the least healthful foods. And many of these are public companies. They have demands from their investors for quarterly earnings. And one really interesting thing I ran across in the ultra processed world was there was a new head of Pepsi took over and created a healthy profile section within their product line, healthier. And they I forgot how many hundreds of millions of dollars they lost. And she very quickly was booted out and replaced with someone who got rid of all the less harmful line and went straight for their core products and continued to contribute to the obesity epidemic. But it just shows that it's not like the system is just set up. It's not like individual actors. It's not maleficence on people's part. It's just the system is trying to make money. They're not trying to make people sick. They're just trying to make money. And unfortunately, how you make money is, you sell people this bad food. And so we really have to kind of take control of our own health, of our own family's health, of our community's health, because unfortunately, these corporations often don't have our family's health forefront in mind.
Yeah, that's right. And at the same time, On the medical school side, we receive 19 hours of nutrition education on average. 40% of med schools have none. That's less than 1% of our total education time. And there's, confusion in the space because of diet. So the consumer, the average person, is living in this environment like you. I love the way you stated this is a normal environment now, and it's normal to gain weight in that environment. And they go to the doctor, and the doctor has no solution for them. And they start a diet in January 2025, and it's very confusing, and diets don't work. And so it's a very confusing environment. Just one note for Plantrician, we have a Plantrician providers. You can find a Plantrician physician who has gone through this extensive education, follows Dr. Michael Greger on nutritionfacts.org, and utilizes nutrition as the cornerstone, as the foundation of their practice. So feel free to log on and find a provider if you're looking for someone. But it puts the individual in a very compromised and difficult position. Right, Michael?
Just today, I'm working on a series of videos on lifestyle medicine. And one thing I came across literally just today, 1985, the National Academy of Sciences said that undergraduate medical education should have a minimum of 25 hours. The fact that 40 years ago, we're not even at the minimum, it's amazing. But in the Permanente Journal, there's these wonderful series of articles that plug Plantrician as a resource. I'm going to make sure to highlight those in the video. And so you're doing just fantastic work. But yeah, again, it's not, that I think we live in a very kind of conspiratorial thinking, I think, these days. And it's not like there's this cabal. It's not like, it's like doctors want to help sick people.
That's right.
They just may not have, been taught the powerful tool that the role diet can have in changing the course of illness. And so, they need these kind of resources like the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, like Plantrician, like Nutrition Facts can provide people so they can kind of catch up. Since, most of what is coming into primary care these days are these chronic diseases like the obesity and high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes, that are, these are lifestyle diseases. Unless we treat the underlying cause, these patients are not going to get better.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Michael. And then medicine, through its reductionistic lens, identifies solutions for the epidemic. And we do gastric bypass, we do, surgical interventions. And looking through the pharmaceutical lens, we've now developed GLP-1 drugs to basically turn off hunger so that you stop eating these, high calorie dense, ultra processed foods and naturally lose weight, because when you don't eat as much, you lose weight. Talk about the little bit of the history for everyone of the GLP-1 drugs, like the kind of the development, the thought behind it, and the hype of those GLP-1s.
Yeah, just for those who don't have a little background on the biology. The GI tract is actually the largest hormone secreting gland in the body, about 20 peptide hormones. About 1 in every 100 cells lining our digestive tract acts as a nutrient sensor and secretes these hormones accordingly, one of which is this glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1. Its primary action is to signal satiety to the brain, activated by meals rich in fat, rich in carbohydrates. This results in reduction of appetite, so we don't eat too many donuts, and then boom, ta-da. They were originally.
I just wanted people to get this, Michael. This is a natural system. That is stimulated by natural foods, avocados, flax seeds, chia seed, beans, lentils, vegetables, right? That you eat the foods, the sensors sense those foods, the fats, and they release GLP-1, and it tells the brain,
But critically important is these nutrient sensing cells that release GLP-1 are located at the end of our digestive tract, right? At the last part of the small intestine and throughout the colon. Now, this makes sense, right? If they're way high up, right, then we eat something and we get satiated too early, right? Be like, oh, I'm already full. No, we need to, one of the big problem throughout most of our evolutionary history was scarcity, right? We want to, to eat a lot of food when it's available. But, oh my God, if food is getting all the way down to the terminal ileum, oh, okay. At that point, the body's like, all right, we're going to put some cells in there that if you got food, once the food makes it all the way down that far, we have to tell the brain, okay, let's shut it down because, if you're obese, you're not going to, run from the saber-toothed tiger as well. Unfortunately, the foods normal natural foods that contain fiber, form this fibrous mass that pulls calories down the digestive tract. Even if they do these studies with oil, if you literally drink liquid oil on a high fiber diet, there's more fat excretion in the feces. Because you think, well, all oil calories would be instantly absorbed. They're acellular high up in the small intestine, but when on a high fiber diet, you're only going to absorb calories through the intestinal lining, and it's not even going to reach the intestinal lining, but it's trapped in this fibrous mass as it should be, as is natural. And so whole natural foods, plant foods, pull calories down to the end of the small intestine to the colon to signal natural satiety mechanisms. However, these ultra processed foods, these fiber-free foods, these acellular foods that are not protectively wrapped in this indigestible fibrous cell walls gets absorbed. When you're drinking soda or something, gets absorbed way high. You eat a donut, everything gets absorbed way high in the small intestine, and there's just no residue. There's nothing left to make it down to where these GLP-1 signaling cells are. So we are subverting our natural satiety mechanisms when we eat this ultra processed junk. And that's most of our calories. And so our body is getting this. It's like we're starving all the time. Like no food is making it down to the end of the small intestine. And so no wonder we just kind of keep piling it on. And so the, big pharma's like, oh, well, okay. What if we go in there and we cut out a large length of your intestine, right? We do like a Roux-en-Y gastric bypass operation. So we cut out a large length of your small intestine. And so then when you eat food, even if you eat relatively crappy food, you will get some of that GLP-1 stimulation. And you actually do see with bariatric surgery, it's not just restrictive, cut out most of the stomach, for example, and you just can't eat a lot of food, but there's also a satiety mechanism because you get calories making it to those GLP-1 stimulating cells, secreting cells. And so okay, instead of eating real food, we can cut out much of your digestive anatomy. That's one way. Or we can actually inject you with just the hormone, so you have high levels kind of all the time. The reason, we've known about this for a while. The problem is GLP-1 only lasts for minutes in the body. In fact, it only makes it one pass through the system before it goes away. It lasts literally just I think half-life is 2 minutes in the body. And so it wasn't until they discovered there's this kind of long-acting GLP-1 agonist in the saliva of Gila monsters of all things, and that allowed them as a model to create long-lasting GLP-1 agonists or mimicking type drugs. First that lasted for hours, then that lasted for days, and then finally kind of culminating with semaglutide, which requires, instead of multiple daily dosing, only once a week dosing, allowing these high stimulation of GLP-1 all the time And so that's kind of like the kind of medical approach to bariatric surgery, instead of just eating kind of foods as nature intended.
Yeah, and so it sounds like a beautiful solution. Once a week injection, satiety, and natural weight loss. What's the dark side, Michael?
Okay, well, before, I mean, so it's important to recognize that obesity is so dramatically decreasing of one's lifespan, reducing life expectancy as much as 6 or 7 years, that like bariatric surgery, these drugs should be considered as a last resort for those unwilling or unable to treat the cause of their obesity. So, for example, in the Swedish obesity study, those that underwent bariatric surgery lived longer than those the same weight that did not. So even though the risks of bariatric surgery are really significant, these are risky surgeries with a high risk population. And as many as 1 in 2,000 people basically die on the table, even with the fatality rate, the mortality rate of surgery and all the complications of surgery and nutrient deficiencies on down the list, still bariatric surgery patients live longer on average than those that didn't go through bariatric surgery. Now, does that say things about that says less about the wonders of bariatric surgery and more about the devastating risks of obesity, right? The problem is people eat too much crap. Anything that gets them to eat less crap can be beneficial, but you don't need $1,000 drug or major surgery to kind of decrap your diet. But so just any talk of risks and benefits is in the context of obesity. So like, even if this drug could cure obesity, then this drug could take years off your life and still be, have the potentially, theoretically, have the risks outweigh the benefits. Now, the problem is it actually doesn't cure obesity. So all the major trials, people started out obese and ended up obese before the drug stops working. After about 12 months, weight loss plateaus and no further weight loss. So they have trials going out 4 years, not a single more pound is lost in the subsequent 3 years. And so you're injecting drugs every week, and you're facing the risks of taking those drugs and the side effects and the long-term unknown side effects with no more weight gain. So you kind of get all the downsides, none of the benefits, and you're obese, and you will remain obese. And the only thing keeping you from getting back to your original higher level of obesity is continuing to take the drugs. And as soon as you stop taking the drugs and switch unknowingly to placebo, you go right back to your kind of original baseline weight and lose all the benefits that you would expect from having being less obese. So really, we're talking not about a cure for obesity on average. Only about 1 in 25 people on these drugs actually achieve a normal weight. We're talking about, and about 1 in 5 actually doesn't work at all. They don't lose significant weight at all or gain weight on these drugs. But we're talking, on average, we're talking about reducing the kind of level of their obesity. Now, that's beneficial. And so much so that people at high cardiovascular risk put on these drugs lose enough weight, even though they're still obese on average, lose enough weight to actually have beneficial cardiovascular outcomes. But if we are not going to cure obesity unless we treat really the underlying cause. The reason these drugs stop working is because our body is just amazing and ramps up our appetite it recognizes that we're losing so much weight and ramps up our appetite so much so that it actually matches the the energy expenditure at the lower weight and weight loss completely stops. And so the question is, I think really for me, after going through you talking about all the side effects and talking about all the complications, really comes down to how, regardless of how you lose weight, we still have to deal with these cravings issue. We still have to deal with this appetite issue. Your body does not want to lose weight, right? Most of the evolutionary pressures was to maintain weight, because again, scarcity was our kind of greatest adversary. And so are there natural ways? We know what the healthiest foods are. Are there natural ways to keep eating those healthy foods and not succumb to cravings? Are there ways to kind of naturally boost, elevate GLP-1 more than it would just naturally be boosted by eating healthy foods? And it does turn out there are certain things that we can eat that can give that extra GLP-1 boost that enables people to stick with a healthier diet, treat the underlying cause, and actually cure their obesity in a natural way without the side effects.
Yeah, fantastic. Before we get to that quick list and then some questions, what does the research say the average weight loss is in a year on GLP-1s? I've looked at this and it's actually surprising.
Well, I mean, so it's surprising actually in both ways, I think. I mean, for anyone who's familiar with weight loss drugs, the reason these are so revolutionary is because, in part, because past pharmacological interventions for obesity have been such utter failures. And so basically no drug in human history, and there's been about 25 different obesity drugs brought into the market, most of which have been pulled from the market for safety concerns that arose on average a decade after they were started, and not pulled until 2 decades after people started having adverse effects. We knew about the adverse complications, but the most, on average, no drug beat 5% weight loss. So that means, you're going from 200 pounds to, 195, but, 190 pounds. And so, and you're facing, oh God, the long list of horrible things that so many of these drugs have caused. And so all of a sudden, to get 15% weight loss with a pharmaceutical intervention is just completely off the charts. And so may not actually sound amazing for someone who's not familiar with the past history of weight loss drugs, but the reason it was just sent shockwaves throughout pharmaceutical industry is because there's just this punctuated equilibrium from drugs that would literally 2 to 3% weight loss. And that was a miracle weight loss drug, headlines everywhere, right? Until they pulled it because it was scarring people's, heart valves or something. But that was the miracle drug, 2 to 3%. And so to get 15% was something that it was why it was kind of such a breakthrough thing. And so with semaglutide and tirzepatide, we can get this kind of 15 to 20%, getting close to kind of bariatric surgery type weight loss on average. And of course, there's kind of a wide range, but we're talking about averages. But again, people start out obese, end up obese, and then have to stay on this drug for the rest of their life. For the money that people are spending on these drugs out of pocket, not only could you get the healthiest food in the world, not only could you get it delivered, you could have a meal service where they don't just send you groceries. They just send you actual food. You could hire a dietitian. You could do it right.
That's great. So thanks, Michael. That is real. I love the perspective. I think it's important for people to see the perspective. It's easy to demonize the drug, but it's important to recognize that for some people that are struggling, this can be a jumpstart or an intervention, right? It's better than not doing anything.
Right. I mean, and there's the parallels we all know with all the lifestyle drugs, right? With statins, right? With blood pressure medications, right? I mean, hydrochlorothiazide saves lives on a population scale, right? Lots of lives. And so if you are absolutely unwilling to to change your diet and lifestyle, these drugs can be life-saving. And so, but that doesn't mean people should be taking these drugs.
Right.
But it's important to, there's end organ damage having high blood pressure. There's end organ damage having all this excess body fat. There's end organ damage, with, having these high cholesterol levels. And so you cannot let kind of the perfect be the enemy of the good. But I think too many people are using this as kind of the easy fix. And does not have the panoply of benefits that obviously treating the cause would. And then, there's, long-term effects to be determined.
Right, great. Thank you, Michael. And real quick, the list that you mentioned of some of those dietary interventions that can...
the two big ones. So I talk about everything that's ever been shown to kind of boost GLP-1, but the two big ones are dark green leafy vegetables. Thanks to these thylakoids, they actually block the chlorophyll rich membranes that make leaves look green. Actually blocks the activity of the fat digesting enzyme lipase, but just temporarily, such that we don't have kind of steatorrhea problems, but it just slows down fat absorption enough that we get some of those fat calories to the end of the digestive tract to boost GLP-1. And so they do these amazing experiments where you take people, randomize them to powdered spinach, mixed into like jam or smoothie, so they can't tell who, it's a double-blind trial. No one knows who got the real spinach and who got the fake spinach. You can do a placebo-controlled trial, and then you do that in the morning, and then in the afternoon, you ask people, chocolate cravings, and you get dramatically significant less chocolate cravings if you had powdered spinach in the morning than if you hadn't. You put people in a functional brain scanner, and you can see less in the kind of reward centers of the brain, less activity, again, just having even hours before some kind of powder. Not that we should be eating powdered greens, that was just an experimental tool to blind people, but eating dark green leafy vegetables, raw or cooked, has this dramatic GLP-1 boosting effect, which has actual effects on cravings, and that drop in cravings translates into less calorie intake, and the less calorie intake translates into weight loss. So it's not just like, oh, well, greens, there's lots of fiber, there's lots of water, there's hardly any calories, they're filling. Beyond that, there is this GLP-1 boosting effect. So we can use that to our advantage by eating green. And the other would be eating groats, whole intact grains. They do these experiments where we have people eat, like rye groats or barley groats at night, and then not only the next day at breakfast, hours later is their appetite, even at lunch. They eat less at lunch the next day. Over 12 hours later, 16 hours later, they eat less. And like significantly less, I think like 100 calories less of a meal. They feel just as full, 100 calories fewer food, just because the night before they got some intact whole grains, because no matter how well you chew, you're going to be left with these little bits, which have, tens of thousands of intact cells encapsulating the starch, which then are not digested because the cell walls are made out of indigestible fiber, until it gets down to your colon, and then your good gut bugs eat that fiber, release this bounty of starch and nutrition, and then there's all these GLP-1 receptors in your colon, and all of a sudden there's all these calories, all this starch, and they're like, wow, okay, quick, GLP-1 goes up, you can detect it higher in the bloodstream, and you get the decrease in appetite, which translates into less caloric intake beyond just, yes, these are really healthy foods. Those two foods, greens and groats, have these GLP-1 boosting effects that have a craving reducing effect, which can enable people to make healthy eating more sustainable.
Wow, that's beautiful. Thank you, Michael. That is exciting. I love that science. That's the science that keeps you up at night, right? I love it.
So cool. So cool. Yeah, just a
So
really
cool.
fascinating. The whole field is really super fascinating.
Yeah, gosh, what an amazing body. So here's a question along these same lines. So trying to find any studies showing if lifestyle changes, whole food plant-based, combined with resistance training and 10,000 steps a day for those on GLP-1s can allow them to stop taking the medications without a weight rebound. Are there any studies that have shown that?
Oh, well, one thing a couple of things. First, I want to point out resistance exercise critically important for anyone doing weight loss, but particularly for these GLP-1 drugs. For some reason, people lose more lean mass taking these drugs than losing weight from caloric restriction through other means. And so I forget what is it. So I should. It's really quite. I was really quite surprised. The differences because there we go. Controlling muscle loss side effects. I'm looking at my own book. That's a. So typically people who are obese, when they lose weight, about 25% of the total weight loss is fat-free mass, which is essentially their lean mass, including their muscles. So for every 4 pounds, you're obese, you lose weight. For every 4 pounds lost on the scale, one of those pounds is actually not fat. But on drugs like Ozempic, 40% of the total weight lost is lean mass. 40%, the scale goes down 10 pounds. 4 of those pounds are not fat. Now, of course, the industry is like, well, yeah, but 6 pounds worse. So your body composition is improving, right? Which is technically true, but that is dramatically more lean mass loss than we would normally see using other methods. And so that is, and that's part of this kind of Ozempic face phenomenon. And it's not just, oh, you're losing lots of fat, you're actually losing significant muscle mass. And so critically important to have a strength training regimen along with these drugs, with weight loss in general, but these drugs in particular, to mediate some of that loss in muscle mass. So critically important, period, regardless. Now, are there studies where they basically, switch people to placebo unknowingly so basically stop the drug and then change their diet in hopes of trying to mediate some of that weight loss? No, there have not been any studies. There's just been studies where keep people on the same diet and they switch them to placebo and the weight just shoots right back up. You're just, appetite comes raging back because it's been suppressed so long. And you lose all the kind of biomarker benefits you have, and you're kind of right back to where you started. And although we may not be back, we may not be back where we started because we may be gaining that fat back, but not the muscle mass.
Right.
So it's possible that you're like, okay, well, that's one of the downsides of so-called weight cycling, is that you lose the fat and muscle, and then if you gain back more fat and you're not gaining the muscle back, then you end up actually having more excess body fat, even if you're at the same weight on the scale than you did before. And this happens all the time. The average, most, I think 80% of people who take these drugs are off these drugs in 6 months. And on average, they last 2 months. It's about 50% drop off. That isn't even before they've ramped up to the kind of effective dose. So most after 2 months, 80% by 6 months have stopped these drugs and this was in a study where the drug was paid for. They paid, so it wasn't because they just couldn't afford it anymore. And this really speaks to the gastrointestinal side effects, which can be very severe with nausea, vomiting. And then nowadays there's not only the cost, but there's supply chain issues and all sorts of reasons why people stop these drugs, primarily though cost and side effects. But then you may end up even worse than before, right? These are lifelong drugs. These are forever drugs because, like any lifestyle drug, they're forever drugs because if you don't treat the underlying lifestyle cause, then if you don't change your lifestyle, well, then you got to stay on these drugs forever.
Yeah, wow, that is interesting. 80% at 6 months. My
80%
goodness.
in 6 months. That's the largest study that's ever, real world study that's ever been done. And so it's like, well, wait a second. No wonder, insurance companies don't want to pay for this. No wonder the government doesn't want to reimburse for these. If you're just going to stop these drugs, then you're not going to see these, the cardiovascular benefits that we would expect to see with significant weight loss, even if people are still obese.
Right. Wow. And Rebecca has kind of a follow-up question on this is, can these be used in a systematic approach, incorporating lifestyle modification, resistance exercise, and using it as a jumpstart? Is that something
I think what's one kind of psychological way these drugs may help people lose weight is, I think I'm sure you've had this experience where people come to you, obese individuals come to you and they are like, I'm like biochemically broken. Like I don't eat that much. Like other people, I eat as much as other people, but I gain weight. Other people, I can't lose weight. I've gone on like starvation diets. I still can't lose weight. There's like something, maybe it's a glandular thing or whatever. Like, other people can lose weight. I can't lose weight. And there's studies of these people that claim to have this. They're just, different. And so what they do is they basically lock people up in these ward studies, and everybody, 100% of people lose weight exactly as we would expect them to lose weight. There's kind of a thermodynamic period. Of course, they lose fat mass, not necessarily weight, because you can maintain all sorts of water weight for days. You can actually put people on, some people, extremely low calorie diets, and they don't actually lose weight on the scale. It can be 5 days until finally the water weight comes crashing off and they come down right to where we would expect to, even though every day they're losing body fat as everybody loses body fat. But people honestly really think that they are not eating that much and they can't lose weight. And you put them on these drugs and they eat less food, like they're not as hungry, they eat less food, and all of a sudden they start losing weight. And it's like, oh, food really does matter. Like what I put in my mouth, like if I eat less of it, then I really do lose weight. Like I'm not broken. Like my body works, right? I mean, it's like, oh, eat less food, lose more weight. And so maybe that could break through this, like, wow, it like works. It actually works. And so like, okay, well, maybe if I can find a way to eat less crappy food without the drugs, I would get the same effect, right? And so maybe you would give them jumpstart in that way, in this kind of like, as opposed to just kind of throw their hands up in the air. There's just like, nothing works for me, no matter how little I eat, I can't lose weight. Oh, it actually works to not eat so much bad food. So, maybe that'll give them the inspiration without the drugs.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Michael. Next question. The question was, I'll just summarize it. Are there any permanent long-term effects of these medications, GLP-1s, at a cellular level? Anything that would not be reversible that we know currently? I know this is an evolving science, but
definitely they have the advantage over bariatric surgery in that most of the side effects are reversible, right? So if you have bariatric surgery and have some horrible gastrointestinal problem or complication, you have to go in for another surgery, whatever. I mean, there are things that you could just have to deal with for the rest of your life. Whereas you go on these GLP-1 inhibitors, they last a long time. That's the whole point, right? I mean, so, you get it's not like you can stop taking the drug the next day and feel better. So you're going to have days, if you have a really bad kind of nausea, vomiting reaction, you're going to have days of this, but then you skip that next dose. And it should get better. And so unlike the surgery, if you're having a problem with these drugs, you should be able to stop them, and certainly the short-term side effects should all disappear. There have not been any kind of drug syndromes that we've identified. There's some of these are like finasteride, some of these, this like Propecia hair loss drug, where you have these terrible sexual side effects that sometimes don't ever go away. It changes something in your brain. You stop the drugs, and for the rest of your life, you have these crazy, weird syndromes. And it's like, how devastating, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, not only so we haven't seen any of that. Muscle mass, but we can build that up. There are sometimes very rare but serious, bowel obstructions and pancreatitis and thyroid cancer and maybe pancreatic cancer, which, thyroid cancer is really treatable, but something like pancreatic cancer, if you got that as a result of a drug, that is not something that we typically see is reversible or even successfully treatable. But those are extremely rare events. And again, always in the context of comparing maintaining obesity. You want to know something that has really bad lifelong side effects? Obesity. Maintaining the same level of obesity really is right. So always thinking with that as a counterexample.
Yeah, that's great, Michael. Thank you. We have a couple of people asking, about greens and groats, I love that, greens and groats.
And
somebody asked, did you come across any other research around foods or supplements such as berberine, curcumin, green tea?
Yep. I go through every single food that's ever been shown to boost, and go through dosages and and everything. Berberine is kind of the, being sold as kind of the, nature's Ozempic kind of thing. But let me see what I said. Berberine. Oh, here, let me, here, I can go through some of these others. There are, oh, this is great. Berberine works in rats and petri dishes. Not a single human study on berberine in terms of raising GLP-1, but we do have studies on weight loss, and no effect has been found on berberine supplementation or barberries, which is where berberine is found, for weight loss. And so whether or not they boost GLP-1, that's not what we care about. What we care about is actually, does this translate out into weight loss? There are a few spices, that actually were, there are 3 spices that fulfill the criteria, not only boosting GLP-1, they also have to actually decrease caloric intake. And they don't just have to decrease caloric intake, acutely, they actually have to result in long-term weight loss. To fill those 3 things, very few things made the cut, but 3 spices made the cut. One of which was turmeric. We have a systemic review of dozens of randomized control trials showing turmeric or curcumin supplements can lead to weight loss, slimming, waist circumference. Number 2, cinnamon. Scandinavian researchers randomized people to rice pudding with or without 1 or 3 grams of cinnamon. It's about 1/3 of a teaspoon or a full teaspoon, respectively. The full teaspoon doubled GLP-1. But again, okay, who cares about GLP-1? We have a pooled review, several meta-analysis on cinnamon, 3 or more grams a day, which is a teaspoon a day. That's a lot of cinnamon, but significantly reduces BMI and body weight. And third is cayenne pepper. After a single meal of a half a teaspoon of cayenne pepper, that's a lot of cayenne pepper, GLP-1 boosted significantly within 15 minutes. But then what do we care about? We care about A meta-analysis, but been a dozen trials of supplementation with capsaicin, which is the kind of the spicy compound in hot peppers, does indeed lead to weight loss. So those three spices can also help. You can add some to your groats and grains.
Fantastic. I love it, Michael. This is an interesting question. I think it's a good one just to go back and talk about some of the physiology. Can you explain the idea that GLP-1s are able to treat chronic inflammatory conditions? So the decrease in systemic inflammation from weight loss.
Yeah. So we think it's an indirect effect. So, I mean, you can imagine, the benefits of weight loss are you can get drops in cholesterol, drops in inflammation, improvements in kidney function, kind of on down the list. But these aren't direct effects of the drug, but rather direct effects of weight loss, which again are only maintained as long as you take these drugs.
Yeah, fantastic. That's right. Yeah, because fat is a factory pumping out inflammation.
Absolutely.
And converting
Absolutely.
testosterone into estrogen and promoting angiogenesis. I mean, fat is a dangerous tissue on our body. All right.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Trying to pick we've got a bunch of questions. So I'm going to take a couple outside of weight loss just because I think they're interesting for everyone. Is there any legitimacy to avoiding tea and coffee while eating a plant-based diet because of the tannins and nutrient absorption?
Oh, well, so when it comes to iron, so drinking tea with meals significantly undercuts the absorption of plant-based non-heme iron. And so if you are a menstruating woman, then you really don't want to be drinking tea with meals. We want to maximize iron absorption, so we're eating, iron-rich foods and combining them instead of with iron absorption inhibitors like tea. We're instead eating with iron absorption boosters like vitamin C containing foods. So that's not just citrus fruit, tropical fruits, but also broccoli, bell peppers have a lot of vitamin C. So having that food in your stomach, having those foods in your stomach at the same time you have iron-rich foods like legumes and whole grains will boost that iron absorption. And so we don't run into problems with iron deficiency anemia. You know something, this is interesting. This is a new finding. I'm trying to do this whole rash of videos before I sink into book writing mode for How Not to Hurt for the pain management book. And so I want to, I gotta buffer lots of videos for nutrition facts. We actually hired a nutrition PhD to script some videos while I'm book writing. And she's amazing, but she's slow. And so we need to, I mean, I was slow too before. I just got a lot of practice. And so I've been trying to do a whole bunch of videos. And so I was looking, one thing that we've always said, or certainly I've always said, is that although people eating plant-based diets have lower ferritin levels, this kind of measure of stored iron, we don't have those eating plant-based diets don't have higher rates of iron deficiency anemia, which is what really we care about. And in fact, there may actually be benefits to having low iron stores. People with higher ferritin levels have higher cancer rates, blah, blah, blah. Okay, iron's this double-edged sword. So it seemed like those eating plant-based are just like at the perfect kind of sweet spot. And there really haven't been studies showing higher rates of actual anemia among people eating plant-based until now. On Biobank study out of UK, wonderful study looking at 500,000 people. We have over a decade, over a dozen years now, and thousands of vegetarians and vegans. And so really, before we had like Adventist 2, we had Epic Oxford, but Biobank's coming in strong, coming in hot. And we're seeing this amazing data. And when you're able to study, I forget, 10,000 vegetarians or something, they actually found significantly higher rates. It was a small amount. It was like, I forget, something like 7% iron deficiency anemia among omnivores and like 12%. But it was statistically significant. And so no longer can we say those eating more plant-based don't actually have higher rates of iron deficiency anemia. So it's something that we have to consider. And really, it's a matter of iron-rich foods, not drinking tea with meals. Having tea is wonderful, but drink it between meals. And vitamin C rich foods at your meals. Have a salad with your meals. And to maintain, particularly for people who are actively losing iron every month, and because iron deficiency anemia can have serious consequences in terms of not just energy levels, but kind of in terms of immune function. And so we definitely want to avoid that.
Yeah, fantastic. And for those of you that are watching, for more information on all of this whole topic, nutritionfacts.org, Dr. Greger has a number of really great videos on iron absorption, creating meals that maximize iron absorption as well. So a fantastic resource. This is kind of a good question because we can talk a little bit about physiology. So when someone is trying to reverse hypertension, and so, there's some physiologic changes based upon the degree of blood pressure elevation and the longevity of it, right? They've lost 15% of body weight, and again, no SOS free. How long can it take to stabilize blood pressure?
Oh, so SOS free. So are they implying that they still have high blood pressure?
So I don't know the length of time. It sounds like they're SOS free, working to reverse their blood pressure. I don't know how long they've been on that diet. It sounds like they've lost 15% of their body weight, but they may be still struggling to see a full resolution of their blood pressure.
Okay. Well, so the one of those S's is particularly important, right? Sodium intake. I mean, that is so people, when I had an active practice, that was the number one thing. People come in, they eat so healthfully, blah, 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 but they can eat you can consume, just as much sodium as people eating the worst Western diet. And not only because you're adding salt in the kitchen or the dining room table, but salt added in sneaky ways in processed foods, people eating out at restaurants, you're just absolutely being bombarded by sodium. And we have the clearest evidence in the world, including these really cool randomized trials where you give people long active salt pills versus fake salt pills. You can get their blood pressure up, down, any way you want it, just by changing the amount of sodium in their diet. But that should happen relatively quickly. And in fact, so quickly, sometimes people can become rapidly over-medicated on multiple blood pressure medications after they improve their lifestyle, such that they can bottom out their blood pressures unless their doctor they're being followed closely by their prescriber to deprescribe, to actually lower the doses and potentially remove some or all the drugs, so that you don't get dangerously low blood pressure, which can lead people to be faint and fall over and hurt themselves. And so now there are kind of non-diet. I mean, you could have certain types of kidney problems that can lead to high blood pressure that are kind of independent of diet. Exercise can lower blood pressure. There's certain, nitrate containing foods. There's all sorts of foods and things, but, you'd want to make sure that you don't have one of these kind of secondary causes of hypertension that can be fixed. Because we really expect, certainly I'm sure you can talk a little about your experience, but it can happen really rapidly once someone cleans up their diet.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, within days of changing to a healthy diet, you get that beautiful release of nitric oxide because of the foods, and the blood vessels open up. But I found too, through the years, if somebody's had chronic blood pressure and that those endothelial cells and that blood vessel have just been injured, day after day, you get some some stiffening of that artery and the vessels that can take time to reverse. And so sometimes it can take 6 to 12 months for the body to kind of undo some of that damage that's been there for decades.
You know,
And
what's
then,
amazing, we have these stem cells in our bone marrow, these endothelial progenitor cells that can actually retile our the inside of our arteries. But some of the damage that may be done in some of the farther out layers may take longer time to heal. Yeah. I'm so glad. Yeah. So the moral of the story is, as early as yes, it's never too late to to start
right.
moving, to stop smoking, to clean up your diet, but it's never too early either. So the
Yeah,
earlier we could,
exactly.
we see this with a lot, with like type 2 diabetes. We see these absolute remarkable reversals, beautiful drops in blood sugars. But somebody who's kind of burned out their pancreas, who's had diabetes for a decade, we may not be able to reverse it, even if we're treating the cause, because at that point, some irreversible damage has been done. And there can be scarring. Scar tissue is one of the things that is one of the aspects of aging that I talk about in the How Not to Age book, where it's basically irreversible, which is kind of that's good in many ways. The body wants it to be irreversible because it wants to kind of lock things in place. But unfortunately, if it locks some pathophysiology in place, that's not great. But we can do the best we can. But look, if you cannot get pressures down with lifestyle, using everything under the sun, one should not just be like, oh, I guess I'm going to have a high blood pressure. No, you still need to bring blood pressure down, and that may require some of these these diuretic drugs or more. Because even though, I want to treat the cause, I don't want to treat the symptoms. Well, actually, the symptom of high blood pressure is not just a symptom; it actually causes damage. Like having high blood sugar, yes, that's just a symptom. You don't want to but it actually causes end organ damage, this the microvascular damage. Having high blood pressure is bad for your eyes and your kidneys. So we really do need to get it down. So I think there's this sense that, I eat really healthy, I live really healthy, so I don't have to take medications, or I don't have to do whatever medical intervention that they want. Well, no, they work through, you eat healthy and your cholesterol goes down, and that leads to or you eat healthy, your blood pressure goes down, and that leads to, but if you don't, you actually have to get that intermediate step. It actually has to change your physiology. Otherwise, you don't just kind of magically get the benefits. And just because you see average reversal or average benefits, we've all seen in our practices, some people you do the exact same thing for different people, and you have wildly different effects. And one of the most dramatic examples of this, I remember I was reading about caffeine metabolism. There are some people, caffeine makes them sleepy. Seriously, like you can randomize people to a sugar pill or a caffeine pill, and they get sleepy when they go. And like that just absolutely blew my mind, right? And so anytime you see a treatment effect or we're talking about average effects, just like these GLP-1 agonists, some people gain weight, significant amounts of weight, like gain 40 pounds after starting GLP-1 inhibitors. Now that's very rare, but you always have to treat the patient, right? And too many people, who may not have a doctor, because they want to just kind of do it themselves. Well, you have to make sure that it's actually working. We want to, we really need to treat people as individuals, and even on a population scale, on an average scale, things work. We want to make sure they're working. Make sure that we're actually getting the benefits. And if not, we may have to tweak them. We may have to use any of our modern armamentarium to make sure people are absolutely as healthy as possible, that in no way downplays or undercuts the role of a healthy diet and lifestyle. But we're talking life and death here. Let's make sure everybody is taken care of.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. That's really important perspective. We're going to do 3 more questions. Boy, we have like a never-ending scroll bar here, so I really appreciate all the questions. But you and I both have to go to bed. You more than me because you're on the East Coast.
Oh yeah, I got a Brian Johnson at 8:30. What do you?
Yeah, so we're going to do 2 questions here. So I'm mostly plant-based, but I feel fuller with some animal protein. Feeling fuller makes me eat less. Whole grains, plant protein don't fill me up the same way. Why would that be? And then is there any fish that can be beneficial?
So it's interesting. So protein has a satiating effect more than other macronutrients using a scale, asking people, how full do you feel, right? How hungry are you? But what we care about is, does eating something actually reduce caloric intake at the subsequent meal hours later? And in that case, protein doesn't work. In fact, I talk about this meta-analysis funded by the meat and dairy industry. And basically they're throwing their hands up, exasperated that the protein, that, increasing people's protein intake, people feel satiated. But it doesn't actually translate into reducing calories hours later at kind of add the limited meal, eat as much as you want a few hours later at a buffet. Whereas you give somebody some, boiled potatoes or something, then you actually do get a significant decrease. That is probably the most satiating foods that have been tested that actually does reduce caloric intake. However you feel, you're eating less calories hours later at the subsequent meal. And that's what we really care about in terms of kind of long-term sustainable weight loss. But of course, look, you get as much protein as you want. But it's how many calories you're eating throughout the day. And the best way to do that is eating the most satiating foods, which are packed with water, packed with fiber, and low in caloric density.
Right. And for this person, maybe adding more potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans, lentils, chickpeas, right? To increase.
I think, one of the things what you find in animal protein is you find it very concentrated in calories. When people start eating a healthy diet and they're eating the same amount of food, like they've grown up and they look down at a plate and they're like, this is what lunch is this much food. They look down and it's like that much food. You can't eat that much food if there's, 5 times fewer calorie density, right? You have to eat a lot more food. So you can't eat the same amount of food, the weight of food, the same volume of food. You will actually end up, you actually do some calorie counts on these people and they're like, I'm starving all the time. Well, it's because they're eating what effectively is a starvation diet. They are not getting enough calories. And so no wonder they're not satiated. They're just actually not getting enough calories. And so that's why, if you just eat salads and greens and fruit, like you just couldn't fill enough, you couldn't get enough calories in your stomach to fill it up to, really, that's where some of these, the beans and the whole grains come in, where it has enough caloric density that actually, and some of the starchy vegetables, right, these root vegetables, enough caloric density to actually, make sure you're not on some starvation diet and your body recognizes, wait a second, I've just had, 200 calories the whole day. This ain't gonna fly. No wonder you're starving the next meal and then, order a pizza.
Yeah, fantastic, Michael. So last question, we'll let you go. Interesting, you're gonna be talking to Brian Johnson. I really look forward to hearing how that goes. And that's going to be an interesting conversation. For those of you,
I know I was commenting on he goes to bed at 8:30.
I got you.
So it's my Brian Johnson 8:30 bedtime.
Gotcha. Got you. That would be a good conversation to have.
I know it'd be a great conversation.
Did you see Brian
the Netflix documentary on him just came out?
No, I'll have to watch that.
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, it talks a lot about his family dynamics, and I of course I just want the science, I want all the nerdy stuff, and they talk a lot about kind of just a personal interest story, but yeah, really fascinating.
We'll have to connect with him sometime. Yeah. For those of you that are with us, if you'll in the chat, we're going to just do a quick poll question. The question is, how do you plan to apply the strategies discussed today to your practice or personal health journey? We'd just like to hear that feedback because it helps us shape this, our education, information, resources that we're creating for you. And so if you just take 30 seconds and type that in the chat, our fabulous Director of Education, Jill Edwards, will capture those things. So last question, Michael, because it's a good one. It's about estrogen and cow milk. So how much estrogen do we actually absorb from cow's milk? Does the body make that inactive? How does that affect our health? And the comment was, is that, are we effectively closing the barn door before the cow is bolted if the body reactivates the estrogen?
This didn't used to be as much of a problem as it is today, but we have selectively bred these particular breed of dairy cows to lactate throughout their pregnancy. And so then you can keep them, so then you can shorten the cycle in which they can be reimpregnated and be much more productive. But the problem is when you're lactating during pregnancy, then you have high levels of these class of estrogenic hormones, these pregnancy hormones, which ends up in the milk. Now, there's enough in the milk that if you take prepubescent children or men and you have them drink 2 glasses of milk, you get a significant spike in estrogen levels in their bloodstream, which is noticeable. And in fact, for the kids couldn't even drink 2 glasses of milk. So they only got through like 1 glass of milk, still saw a significant increase. Now, the reason you see that significant increase is because they have low baseline levels of estrogens in their system. If you take, women of reproductive age and have them drink milk, there's so much kind of noise in that signal, you actually can't detect a discernible bump. So that's why you have to use men or children. But you do see this. And now the question is, okay, well, who cares? Well, the reason we care is because there are kind of hormonally mediated cancers. So, for example, one of the most significant diet cancer relationships that's known is between prostate cancer and dairy consumption. If you look at these meta-analyses, very tight correlation between dairy consumption and prostate cancer. That could be for a whole kind of variety of reasons, but that may be why we see some of the adverse effects. Of course, is saturated butterfat. I just was doing a video. There's been, I think, 17 randomized controlled trials where they just swap cow's milk with soy milk. And I mean, super easy, kind of studies to do. And you can get a significant drop in LDL cholesterol, get about a 10-point drop, which would, translate out to significant benefits in terms of decreasing cardiovascular risk. That one simple tweak, right? Decreasing risk of our number one killer, men and women. We presume that's because of saturated butterfat, but there's all sorts of reasons why we should leave milk to the calves. And you don't have to drink any kind of milk at all, but if you are going to drink milk, probably unsweetened soy is probably the healthiest.
Fantastic, Michael. Thank you. Always a wealth of information, and I love gleaning from all of your up-to-date research. I'm filing these things away in my brain as you're talking. And we just thank you on behalf of everybody that's here tonight. Thank you, Michael, for continuing to always look at the research with the eye for the best for patients and the best for people and telling the truth. We appreciate you standing for truth. I know that you take a lot of shots for standing up for the truth. And we all just want to recognize and appreciate all that you do for all of us. Thank you, Michael.
Well, I am always honored to support all your great works and looking forward to seeing people in person at the Plantrician conference this year. I will be there in person and hope you all will be too.
Hey, that's right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, my dear friend. And thank you to all of you who joined us tonight. And for all of you that will watch this at a later date, we appreciate your partnership and your friendship. And as friendships and community are so important, Michael and I have been friends for a very long time, and we help each other. And there's this amazing network inside of this community. We believe community is important. And as Michael said, that's why getting together and sharing meals together in person at conferences is really invaluable. The information is fantastic, but actually sitting down with people, giving them a hug, shaking a hand, talking, and connecting is probably one of the highlights of the year and will supercharge you to go back out and face this challenging culture, but to do it with great passion and compassion for people. So my friend Michael, we made it. You've got time to brush your teeth and put your pajamas on. Be in bed by 8:30. Thanks for joining us, my friend. Have a wonderful night. I'll see you soon.
And flossing as well. Thank you.
That's right. Thank you, Michael. And good night, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you very soon.